Good morning, class. Welcome to spring 2021. This morning, and it's morning when I'm shooting this video, I'm going to walk you through the supplies and equipment that you will need for my painting class. This is Professor Lyle speaking. And if you're taking one of my painting classes, you should have received through email a syllabus, which would include a outline of the workload for the semester, and also it would have a supply list in the syllabus, and I also sent out a separate document that included illustrations of various supplies that you would need to get started. But right now we're going to go over the supplies for painting, and I'm going to walk you through things that you'll need. Okay, we're going to start off right over here. We have painting knives. Okay, these are plastic painting knives, and these can be acquired like at Walmart. They probably have them in Hobby Lobby. They come in packs, and they're various shapes and sizes. We use these to mix our paint on the palette. You can also purchase metal painting knives or palette knives. If you get a metal palette knife, you want to make sure that the blade or the plate and the metal handle that goes into the wooden handle, yes, this is wood, this is metal, this is all metal, it's got some old paint on it, but you want to make sure this is all one piece. All right, if this is two pieces, if the plate or the blade and the metal neck, if you will, if it's two pieces, what can happen is you can see that the blade is flexible, but as you put pressure, it could just snap off. So you want to make sure it's all one piece. If you get a metal painting knife like this, it'll cost you a little bit, but it's worth it. Another good alternative are cake knives, frosting knives, and you can find that in the home section, or the little party section is where I got this, over at Walmart. Doing advertisements for Walmart, how about that? Kmart probably has the same thing, or your grocery store, H-E-B, any of those places. Anywhere where you can find cake decorating stuff, you should be able to find a frosting knife like this. And they come in various sizes, like this one, see? These are excellent substitutes for the palette knife. Next thing up is our brushes, okay? Brushes. And we'll talk about them momentarily here. You have rounds, okay? That's called a round. See the bristles, the head, if you will, how they go, it goes down into a point, and it's in a round configuration. See this metal piece right here? That's called the ferrule, and it is also in a round orientation. That's what causes the bristles to be round, to be in a circle, and to taper down to a point. You also have flats, okay? You have flats. A flat is where the ferrule, again, that's that metal piece right there, is crimped so that the bristles are oriented rather into a kind of a square or rectangular configuration, and they come to a flat edge. You also have what's referred to as brights. A bright is a flat where the corners have been trimmed so that the head of the brush is slightly rounded on the edges. That's called a bright. So rounds, flats, and brights are all the types of bristle configurations that you need. Now, if you'll notice, all of these brushes have a long handle, okay? Oil painting, and by the way, we're going to be working in oil paint. I should have probably said that first. Everything we're doing for this class is in oil paint. But the long-handled brush is an oil painting brush. You can also use these for acrylic brushes. Short-handled brushes, let me show you a demonstration. See, that's a short-handled brush. That's for water-based paint, watercolor, essentially. Actually, that's a craft brush. So the actual painting brush has a long handle. And these come in a variety of sizes, also costs, okay? Depends on what the bristles are made from. For For our purposes, you probably shouldn't have to spend a lot of money, but if you want to invest in some good brushes, they can last you a long time. Now, let's talk about the hairs for the brush for a moment. You have hog's hair, hog's bristles, okay? Hog's hair brushes been around since the 1860s, so about 150 years. And then you also have more traditional, softer hair brushes, traditionally made from things like weasel or squirrel or rabbit. And also the most expensive would be sable, right? Sable brushes. Nowadays you can also get what's called Sableene. It's a synthetic nylon that's made to mimic sable hair. So depending on the type of hair of the brush is how expensive it is. I recommend you get a pack of inexpensive hog bristle brushes, and then get you a few a little more expensive, softer Sableene, Sable mix. And when I say sable, I'm just referring to the softness of the hair. It's not this one's Sableene, it's nylon. It's not necessarily sable. Of course, you can get sable brushes. Sable, Kandinsky is a brand name from Russia. Very, very expensive, but they'll last you a lifetime if you take care of them. But I recommend a mix of brushes. You want some that are soft for finishing work on your painting. You want some bristle hair brushes for laying paint down, for underpainting. And we'll get into all of that as we move through the semester. You also want a variety of sizes of brush, okay? Look, these are cheap plastic handle. I think they cost me about $3, maybe less, okay? Nylon, Sableene, so natural and a mix of nylon and natural fibers. Very inexpensive. They tend to snap. Plastic brushes like this tend to snap, but I like the size. A little more expensive, wooden handle, okay? Not much more expensive. Medium size, all right? The brushes usually have a number on the handle that tells you the size of it, correlates to the size. This is a number 8. This would be, I think, a number 2 or 3. Well, I can't see it, got rubbed off. Anyway, small. You want a variety of sizes. It's not a bad idea, especially if you're a painting major or if you're a studio major concentrating in painting. Get you a brush collection going, okay? And that's just some of what I've got, collected over a number of years, okay? So invest in your brushes. Next up, let's talk about color for a minute. Paint, we'll talk about paint. Color, paint, however you want to say it. You need your primary colors, okay? Cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, ultramarine blue. You need those 3. You need earth tones. Burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. Now this is minimum, all right? There's a few other colors I'm going to recommend here in a moment, but this is for getting started. And you also need titanium white. Now I buy it in this big quart-sized can because I use a lot of it. I paint a lot. You can get titanium white in a 150 milliliter tube. I would recommend at least that. Your paints come in large tubes or small tubes. You get these 150 milliliter tubes, and then you also get these smaller 32 milliliter tubes, okay? And depending on the size is the amount of paint you're actually purchasing, that affects the cost. I recommend Utrecht brand paint. It's pretty good color. Okay, it's good student grade color. I use it for my own paintings. It's relatively inexpensive compared to other artist grade paints. Things like Gamblin paint, which is a very good domestic brand, tends to be expensive. Williamsburg, another domestic handmade paint brand, very expensive, relatively speaking. Then there's paints from abroad. Things like Old Holland, very, very, very good color, Old Holland, but also very pricey. And you're not going to get these big tubes like this. Now, locally, there's brand names like Georgian or Winsor Newton. Winsor Newton is okay, but there's a lot of paraffin in the paint, a lot of filler. Georgian tends to not be as good of color, Okay, so you get what you pay for. This stuff is relatively not as expensive as some of those other domestic paints that I talked about. And well, let's talk about color for a minute. Your cadmium colors are going to be a little pricey. 150 milliliter tube of paint like this, you're probably paying close to $30, but it'll last you all semester. Okay, ultramarine blue tends to not be near as expensive. It's usually under $20. Your earth tones, about the same. Okay, if your color, if the tube of paint you're purchasing has the word hue on it, I get this question all the time. Mr. Lyles, I found a tube of cadmium red paint that was a lot less in cost, but it said cadmium red hue. Is that the same thing? Technically, no. If it says hue, that means that it's a chemical dye. Okay, it's not the actual cadmium mineral with the pigment. It's a dye. It's a synthetically produced color, and there are some very good synthetically produced colors. They're generally not the cadmium colors, however. Okay, cadmium colors tend to be very rich, very bright, and they last you a long time. So I recommend for your primary set that you stay away from hues. Off the shelf, off-brand paints, things like you might find at Walmart or a store like that, these are not very good paints. They have a minimum amount of pigment. They don't have a lot of oil. They have a lot of filler. They have a lot of white chalk, okay, in the paint. So your color's not as rich. You want paint that's got a good pigment saturation in it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other colors that we'll get into later in the semester. I'll introduce them. We'll have an alternative primary set, as I like to call it. Hansa yellow, which is a cool yellow. Alizarin crimson, okay, which is, here's a smaller version, which is a type of red, very close to violet. It makes very good violets, by the way. Cerulean blue. Cerulean blue, there's cerulean blue pure, which is expensive. And then there's cerulean blue hue, which is not as expensive and is a slightly different color, okay? The cerulean blue hue tends to be more acidic in its tone. It's a little brighter, and it makes good greens. The cerulean blue pure tends to be a little more metallic looking in its tone, and it's very good color for making skies. Cobalt blue, and if you're going to get cobalt blue, and I recommend that you do, you can get one of these smaller tubes of it. It's an excellent blue. It's not as deep and dark as the ultramarine, but it's very good for making sky colors. It's a good middle blue. It's very opaque, very solid, okay? And then I also recommend zinc white. Zinc white is more like flake white. Flake white, if you've heard of that before, used to be made out of lead, and it's not very good for your nervous system. Zinc white is made out of zinc and tends to refract light so that the color's brighter. Titanium is a good, strong, solid white, really great for underpainting, but it can make color look rather chalky if you've got too much white in your color. So that's why I recommend having zinc as well. I like to mix the two. You get the best of both worlds. But definitely you need titanium white. Okay, mediums. We'll talk about mediums, and then I think we'll get back into color for a minute. Mediums. You need a solvent, okay? I recommend low odor mineral spirits. Now, the traditional solvent for oil paint is pure gum turpentine, gumwood turpentine, or it may say pure gum turpentine on the can. That kind of turpentine is made from pine trees. It's a distillate of a pine resin, and it stinks to high heaven, but it's the traditional solvent. Odorless mineral spirits or low odor mineral spirits is a petroleum derivative. It can have a different effect on the color long term, like 50 years from now. But for immediate use, it's fine. It's perfectly serviceable, and it doesn't smell as bad. It doesn't give off quite the same odor when the fumes are there coming up. There's also mineral spirits that are formulated for oil painting. Like, say you went over to Hobby Lobby and you bought a small jar of their little Mona Lisa low odor mineral spirits, specifically formulated for oil paint. Well, you're paying a name brand, and because it's designated as an art material, the price is higher, okay? This works just as well. Now, not everybody says so, not everybody agrees with me about that, but no, this is fine. If you would rather use the name brand solvent for oil painting, or the oil painting solvents that are formulated, that's fine, you can do that, but it'll cost you a little more money. There's another brand that I recommend called Gamsol. Gamsol's from the Gamblin Paint Company, art supply company, domestic art supply company. They developed a solvent that was formulated for oil painting that had a very low flash point, okay? Flash point is the temperature at which solvents like turpentine or mineral spirits could actually combust. And that is possible. That's something that can happen. If you had an open can of turpentine sitting in your car, let's say, on a warm South Texas summer afternoon, you're running a risk of the thing flashing, okay? The fumes build up, there's a direct beam of sunlight, it gets hot enough to where suddenly it starts to smolder and poof, okay? That can happen. So how do we avoid that? Well, number one, we put the lid on the can. Ta-da, lid's off, lid on. All right, there we go. Now it's inert. Now there's not the fumes getting out. Secondly, I don't leave this in my car, all right? I take it home, I put it in my studio, I put it in, if I was at school, I put it in a fireproof cabinet, which is where you keep your solvents, where we actually in school. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Due to COVID and the continuing rise in numbers, I'm not having our class meet face-to-face. We're not going to do it, okay? I'm going to communicate with you via email. I'm going to send you out written instructions. I'm going to send you out demonstration videos. You're going to respond to me through email. You're going to send me your work via JPEG through email, and we're going to communicate that way, and it's going to work just fine. We did it last semester. It was fine. Okay, so this is how we're going to proceed. Now, jars. I recommend you save you up some glass jars. Why? Because we can put our solvent in the jar. When I'm painting, I don't stick my brush down into my can of mineral spirits. I pour some into a jar. An old tomato sauce jar, a pickle jar, a jelly jar, some kind of jar, okay? And now, if I need to, all right, swish my brush around to get some paint off, or to get my brush, saturated with solvent before I pick up paint, whatever the case may be, that's what I do. That's what that's for. Ta-da, okay? So you need a jar. The other thing you need is oil. Linseed oil. Now, linseed oil is not the only oil for painting. There's walnut oil and sunflower oil and poppy seed oil. Get linseed oil, okay? I purchased this in this large quart-sized container, usually 4 at a time, from Utrecht. If you order your supplies online, it'll be here in a week, okay, or less. I get it this size. Now you can purchase those smaller perfume-sized bottles of oil paint over at the art supply store, the hobby supply store, craft supply store, and it'll last you for 2, maybe 2.5 assignments, and you're paying retail markup. This, yeah, I'm paying a little bit of retail, but not as much as I'm paying at the store, and I get more for my money. So I recommend you get you a quart size. I recommend that. It'll last you all semester, maybe maybe even longer. Especially if you're a studio major and you're focusing on painting, get used to buying your supplies in bulk when you can, okay? So that's my recommendation. But you need linseed oil, refined linseed oil, artist linseed oil, okay? That's what you need. This is the medium. This makes the paint go. This is the solvent. Oil painting, you need oil and you need a solvent. You need both of those. I also, since we were talking about jars before, I recommend, this one's been used, as you can see, I recommend you get some baby food jars. If you have a baby, or you have a baby brother or baby sister, or you have a little niece or nephew, or your neighbor has a baby, ask them not to throw away the little jars. Ask them if you can have some, or raid the trash, or keep them, whatever the case may be. These are excellent little studio tools. I pour off some oil. Again, we don't want to put the brush down in the oil jar. I pour off some oil into my little baby food jar, and then boom, there we go. I can put my brush in there, pick up oil, put my knife into it, pick up oil, whatever the case may be. Baby food jars, oil. Okay? I've also seen little small jelly jars. Had students use those before too. You need jars. Now, you also need rags. Okay, rags. This like a old washcloth or a terry cloth. I like to use an old cotton t-shirt torn up. These are excellent rags, very soft. And what do we use the rags for, Mr. Lyles? Well, for cleaning off our brushes, or for cleaning off our knives. If need be, wiping the paint surface down, right? I don't like what I'm doing. I want to go again, put some turpentine or some mineral spirits on my rag, wipe it down, okay? You need rags. How do you store your rags? Good question. Where are we using the classroom this semester? There's a rag can, a lidded metal container where we keep our rags. What do I do with my rags at home? I'm painting at home. Well, if you've got a lidded container you want to put your rags in, do that. Get you a trash can with a lid, do that. You can also keep them outside. Just put them outside. All right, put them over the rail. If you live in an apartment, there's a rail. If you're upstairs, there should be a rail on the banister. Just hang them off the banister. Put them in your, as long as they're in the air, in the open air. These rags get saturated with oil. They get saturated with your solvent. They get paint on them. Okay, all that stuff gets saturated into the rag. The rag is flammable already. Now it's even more flammable. So you want to put this either in a space like a can with a lid where those fumes can't get out into the room, or store them outside, hang them up outside. They'll air out. All right, the solvent will evaporate away. The oil will dry. All right, the paint on it will dry. Well, what do I do when the rag gets all saturated and I can't use it anymore? It's all hard and crusty. Well, there's a number of things you can do. You could wash a load of dirty rags. You want to make sure that the paint on the rags is dry. I wouldn't recommend you put wet oil paint into your washing machine. You won't like the results. That's not a good thing to do. You could wash it out by hand, soap and water, rub a dub-dub, squeeze it out, let it dry. Okay, that's another option. You could, once it becomes so saturated that it's not really usable, this one's almost there, this is almost not usable, you could throw it away. All right, put it in a plastic sack, tie it up, and pitch it out. That's another option. I usually let my rags hang around for a long time, okay, until they just get so stiff that I can't do anything else with them. All right, and you'll probably find that your rags have a lot more longevity than you think. But I don't keep them in a closed, or I don't keep them in a room where the fumes can get out into the room. They're either in a closed lidded can, or they're outside, or they've been outside and they've dried off to the point that they're inert. Okay, so be cautious with your flammable materials. Be aware. I wouldn't leave a wet, saturated, solvent saturated rag sitting inside your car. Okay, that's not a good thing to do. All right, wrap it up at the very least, wrap it up in a plastic sack, a Walmart sack. Okay, But keep it out in the air, let it evaporate out. It'll be okay. It should be okay. All right, now let's talk about, oh yeah, here we go. I also recommend sandpaper, a medium to fine grain sandpaper. You can take an old painting that wasn't working, let it dry a bit, and then sand it down, go again. That's something I do. Or you can work back into a surface. So you've got a painting that you're wanting to work on. It's dried. You've left it alone for a little while, and you want to come back into it. Scuff up the surface just a little bit in the area you want to work or rework. So sandpaper. We can talk about that some more as we go. Your palette. Palette. This is a traditional shaped wooden palette. Okay. Ta-da. The palette is the surface where you lay your color out. Okay. Generally, what happens is we lay our paints out in an orderly fashion. We'll go over palette layout when we do the demonstration for the first exercise, which will be your next video, by the way. And we lay it out along the perimeter of the palette, and then we've got the interior of the palette to mix our paint. I like to have a big rectangular palette. That's what I like to use. If you're going to use a smaller traditional size palette, I recommend you get more than one. They're wood or they're plexiglass, plastic, acrylic, okay, plastic. You're going to need canvas panel, 9x12 canvas panel for your exercises. I also like to use canvas panel at a larger size. I use these as palettes, they're convenient. Okay, and I'll probably do my demonstrations at a larger scale too. But for your exercises, you'll need canvas panel, at least 9x12. Okay, if you want to work larger, you can, but please no smaller than this. Okay, there's going to be 5 exercises throughout the semester, or they're a separate grade from your painting assignment. The exercises, there's 4 exercises that are color mixing exercises that will introduce the color schemes that we're using for various assignments. And then there's a 5th exercise, which has to do with understanding space, understanding your composition. And it has to do with the landscape painting. We'll get there. Your actual painting surfaces. Let me find where I put that. There it is. Okay. 16x20 is minimum size. You can use, for this semester, you can use a pre-stretched canvas. Okay, pre-stretched canvas is fine. Normally, I have my classes go to the wood shop and we build our canvas stretchers. Because of COVID safety measures, social distancing, it's not practical to try to do that this semester. So I'm just taking it off the table. We can use the pre-stretched canvas. Now, the pre-stretched canvas, you can see I used this as a demonstration for a palette earlier. Anyway, the pre-stretched canvas comes with a white acrylic ground. That's gesso, okay? However, it's not very solid. It's very thin. It's a very thin coat of gesso that was sprayed on. If you held this up to the light and looked at it from the back, you'd see little pinholes of light coming through. So it's porous, which means your oil paint will seep through and get on the cotton fibers of the canvas, and over time it'll rot. Okay. You can get commercially produced acrylic gesso. The one thing I forgot to put on my table this morning. Okay, you can get commercially produced acrylic gesso and give it an extra coat of gesso if you choose. I'm not going to enforce that, but it's my best recommendation. One of the things we're going to be doing this semester is I'm going to be recommending studio practices as we go. I'm going to tell you or show you what I regard as the optimum way to do things, and then you adjust from there. Okay, so I recommend you get some acrylic gesso. Again, I buy it by the gallon. A gallon of artist grade acrylic gesso from the Utrecht company costs about $50. Okay, but it'll last you a long time. You can get it smaller. It does. You don't have to get the big gallon size. You can get it quart size. I recommend you get some and an even coat. Probably what I'll do is I'll make a demonstration video about gesseling a pre-stretched canvas. Okay. You'll notice also on the pre-stretched canvas in the corners there's these little slots, little holes, and I get this asked. People ask me, what are those for? Well, oftentimes with the pre-stretched canvas, particularly a decent one, there's these little wooden pegs, triangular shaped pegs. They're called keys, and they fit into those holes, and it tautens up the canvas. Okay, you fill those holes, they push out in the corners. It causes the canvas to tighten up a little more. Okay, so that's a good practice. All right, for the pre-stretched canvas. Your syllabi will have, like I said at the beginning, an outline of the assignments. There's, I think, about 7 assignments. I think that's correct. I'm going off the top of my head. 7 assignments, painting assignments, actual paintings, plus the 5 exercises. So I get asked frequently by people trying to collect all their supplies at the beginning of the semester, which is a good idea. Do so. Sometimes financial aid requires you to go ahead and give a listing of your expenses. Okay, fine. You need at least 7 pre-stretched canvases, minimum size 16 by 20. You're welcome to work larger. You are absolutely welcome to work larger. Please don't work smaller. Don't try to work smaller. Work at least that size. It's a medium size. And then of course you need the 5 9 by 12 canvas panels. Okay. If you order your basic paint supplies, your basic paints from the Utrecht company, if you ordered them today, they'd be here in a week. Well, I don't have the capacity to do that, Mr. Lyles. Okay, great. Run down to Hobby Lobby, pay a little more, get you some, the little 32 milliliter tubes. Get a decent brand. Winsor Newton's probably pretty good. Georgian is in a pinch, but you get what you pay for, okay? Again, you get what you pay for. Remember that. Be a good consumer. Yes, your most expensive paint out of this whole setup is going to be your cadmium colors. 150 milliliter tube cadmium color. Cadmium red medium, 150 milliliter tube from the Utrecht company. That runs you close to $30, maybe more. It's worth it. You get what you pay for. Now let me think real quick. Let me go over. This is just introduction of basic supplies. I think that'll cover it, at least for the moment. Okay, that'll cover it. Our next demonstration video that I'm going to send out, we're going to go over laying out your palette, and we'll talk about the very first exercise. The paint that you'll need for that. Let me just get down to brass tacks. What do I have to do to get started? What do I absolutely minimum have to get the ball rolling for the semester, Mr. Lyles? Great, glad you asked. Burnt umber, you need that. Ultramarine blue, you need that. Titanium white, you have to have that. Linseed oil, and then a solvent. Okay, I recommend odorless mineral spirits. Brushes, palette knives, you need that too. Rags, of course. Your jars, you need that too. Okay, your palette, all right, your palette. You need something to mix your paint on. You need that. Okay, but as far as the paint goes, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, titanium white. What we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to mix black. Mix black? We can't use black out of the tube? No, we're not doing that. Now, since I brought it up, let me talk about it a minute. There are blacks. There are oil paint blacks. Things like ivory black, Mars black, lamp black. All right, and they're fine colors. All right, and in traditional, when we say traditional, we're talking about European neoclassical painting. 16th through the 18th century. All right, that's what we're talking about. When you hear the word classical or traditional, that's what that means. We're not using those blacks for this class. Okay, take them off the table. Why? Well, some of them, when you try to mix them, they go green. When you try to add another color to it, they turn green. Some of them, when you add white and try to make it gray, they turn silver. Okay? What I want to teach you how to do, all right, one of the things I want to impart to you is the ability to judge the temperature of a color, its tone, how warm or cool a color is. Okay? So our first exercise is going to be a value scale, 3 value scales actually, where we're going to mix a middle black, a cool black, and a warm black. And then we're going to take that range of color and use it to make a painting. Okay, that'll be our color scheme, our palette. All right? So I want to get you used to mixing color because we're going to be doing a lot of it. That's what this class is going to be about. But we're going to start out dealing with value and tone, temperature, if you will. Warm and cool. These are key principles. You need to know them. And so we're going to focus on that. But our next video will cover the exercise, and then shortly after that, the next video will be the actual painting assignment. Okay? We're going to take it one step at a time. Rule number 1 in my class, don't panic. Okay? I'm not going to give it all to you in the front end. We're going to go through things step by step. Stay with me. Ask me questions. We're going to work it step by step. Mr. Lyles, I couldn't find your class on Blackboard. Where do I put my assignments on Blackboard? Hey, folks, I've told you. Email. You're going to email me your assignments. I'm going to email to you your instructions. Okay? Pay attention to your email. All right? Okay, so we're going to be uploading this video to a YouTube channel, and I'll be sending you the link today. And if you have questions, you can ask me. Thanks.